All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving deep into one of the biggest questions in all of science. What exactly is mass? And to do that, we're going to explore a really unconventional theory, one that doesn't just challenge the answer, it challenges the very question itself.
Okay, so to get started, let's just go back to basics for a second. You probably learned this in school, right? The classic textbook difference between mass and matter. Mass is basically a measure of inertia, how much something resists being moved. And matter, well, matter's the physical stuff, the atoms, the particles, that has that mass. Seems pretty straightforward. But hang on a second. If you think about it, that's not really an explanation, is it? We end up in this weird loop. We define matter as the thing that has mass, and mass as the property of matter. See the problem? It's a completely circular definition that doesn't actually tell us anything new.
So, here's where it gets interesting. What if that circle isn't just some sloppy wording? The theory we're digging into today, it argues that this little logical loop is actually the first thread you pull that unravels a huge fundamental error in how we see reality itself.
All right, so if there's a huge error, where did it come from? Well, according to this perspective, the mistake goes way, way back. It's about a fundamental assumption we made about the very nature of space and time. You could almost call it a philosophical choice about what reality is at its core.
And here's the supposed culprit, our use of continuous mathematics. We basically assume that space and time are perfectly smooth, that you can zoom in forever and ever and it'll never get pixelated. This idea, the continuum, is baked into our physics. But the argument here is that this assumption, it's the original sin that introduced a fatal flaw into everything that followed.
So this really boils down to two completely different ways of looking at the universe. On the one hand, you have what this theory calls the death model. Think of it as starting from zero. It begins with an empty void. In this view, reality can be infinitely divided and everything eventually decays. Entropy always wins. But on the other hand, you have this discrete model. This one starts from one. It begins with existence. Here, reality is finite. It's made of fundamental units with fixed addresses, and get this, information is always conserved. Nothing is ever truly lost.
Okay, so let's run with that second idea for a bit. If we toss out that void-based death model, what does this new one-indexed reality actually look like? Well, it looks a lot less like a smooth-flowing painting and a lot more like a digital screen. It's a universe built on integers, on hard, solid numbers. And that's a really crucial distinction. Because if the universe is fundamentally discrete, if it's built from tiny, indivisible pixels, let's say, then the constants of nature, the very rules of the game, can't be these messy, rational numbers that go on forever. They have to be clean. They have to be precise integers or simple ratios.
And this leads to the first and probably the most shocking claim of this theory. It says that pi isn't 3.14159 and so on. Nope. In this model, pi is exactly 3.
Now, I know what you're thinking. How on earth can pi be 3? Well, the logic goes like this. Imagine reality isn't a smooth sheet of paper, but a grid of tightly packed units, kind of like a honeycomb. In that world, what's the most perfect circle you can make? It's not actually a circle, it's a hexagon. And if you measure that hexagon, its diameter is 2 units, and its circumference is exactly 6 units. 6 divided by 2 is 3. So what about that leftover 0.14159? According to this theory, that's just a mathematical error. A bit of scrap we create when we try to cram a discrete, hexagonal reality into our smooth, continuous equations.
And it's not just pi. Take the fine structure constant, alpha. This is a super important number in physics that basically sets the strength of how light and matter interact. The theory says its true value isn't some messy decimal, it's exactly 1 divided by 137. Clean and simple. But wait, you might say, our best instruments measure it as 1 divided by 137.035 something. Well, this theory argues that extra decimal isn't a sign of more precision. It's actually just noise. It's static, an artifact created because we're using the wrong mathematical rulers to measure a perfectly integer-based reality. Okay, but this is where the whole thing takes a really wild turn. Because it's not just about abstract physics and weird math anymore. The theory makes this incredible claim that this foundational error has real physical effects right inside our own biology. It zeroes in on this one specific molecule, mRNA-137. In biology, this thing is known as a master regulator in the brain. It's deeply involved in how our brain cells communicate, and this is key, it's also heavily linked to the risk of schizophrenia, a condition that is, at its heart, a profound disruption in how a person processes reality.
The theory proposes something pretty radical. It calls this molecule the biological executioner. The idea is that our bodies, which are fundamentally discrete physical systems, actually produce this molecule as a kind of recoil, a defense mechanism against the lie of the void. It's supposedly there to shut down the biological noise that gets generated when we try to make sense of a discrete world using a broken, continuous framework.
So let's just pause and connect the dots here. We have the fundamental constant of physical interaction, which this theory says is 1 over 137, and then we have the master biological regulator in the brain, miRNA 137. Is that just a coincidence? The theory says absolutely not. It calls it a consonance. It's like a harmonic resonance, a signature proving that the physics of light and the biology of the brain are part of the very same unified system.
And that idea of consonance, of everything being part of one single system, is really the linchpin of this whole thing. So let's pull back and look at the final piece of the puzzle, the theory's unified model for the entire cosmos.
Okay, get ready for this. The source proposes that the universe isn't infinitely expanding toward a cold, dark end. Instead, it's a deterministic, finite machine. A computer, really. And this computer runs on a repeating cycle of exactly 60 states. Think about what that means. The so-called heat death of the universe? It's not our fate. It's just a software bug from using the wrong operating system.
So how does this cosmic machine actually work? Well, its engine is the Fibonacci sequence. But there's a special rule. The system runs modulo 60, which is just a fancy way of saying it's on a loop with 60 steps, kind of like the numbers on a clock face. And when you run the numbers through the system, something incredible happens. At certain key steps, like the 19th step, the math forces the system to reset, perfectly back to 1. This creates a perfect closed loop. It's a system designed so that nothing is ever lost.
And the best part? The entire instruction set, the literal source code for this entire cosmic operating system. The claim is that it can be stored in just 20 bytes, a 20-byte packet of information that contains all of reality.
You see how this just flips everything on its head? From this perspective, the void isn't real. It's a mathematical hallucination. Entropy isn't an iron law of the universe, it's a software bug. A so-called massless particle is just a bad name for what is really a packet of pure information. And things we call coincidences, they don't exist. There's only consonance, the universe harmonizing with itself.
Which leaves us with one last, truly mind-bending thought. Could it be that everything we see, this entire vast, complex universe, is just the result of a decompression algorithm running in real time? Just like a tiny zip file unpacking into a huge movie? If that's even remotely possible, then we might have to rethink everything we thought we knew about the very nature of reality itself.